A pleasant day, everyone. I am Vincent Ray B. Tambis, and welcome to my virtual discussion. And today, I will be discussing one of the types of assessment, which is formative assessment. So if you have some questions or clarifications, you can just message me in my FB account, Vincent Ray B. Tambis. So just bear with me, guys. So again, this is the topic about formative assessment. So when you say formative assessment, what really comes up in your mind? I know some of you are somewhat familiar with this kind of words, formative assessment. So yes, because a formative assessment, we already discussed it or learned it during in our second year in college, if I'm not mistaken. And this formative assessment is somewhat a test that will, gauge us in a successful learning process. So now let's dig deeper in more information about formative assessment. Formative assessment is an ongoing process used by teachers during instruction to gather feedback on student learning and understanding. So there's the word there, feedback. So this is a time that this teacher use that feedbacking. The teacher will give comments or suggestions in a particular topic or performances performed by the students. And the primary goal is to inform and adopt teaching methods, allowing educators to adjust their approach based on their real time understanding of the students' strengths and weaknesses. So formative assessment assess, measure the strengths and weaknesses of the students. So when we say assessment, first first thing is it will measures the capability of the students. And when we say formative assessment, it will use, or this is a time that the teacher use that these kind of strategies so that again there will be a successful learning process. And there's the word there, strengths and weaknesses. Obviously it will measure the strengths and weaknesses of the students. How? I said a while ago that we are somewhat have this feedback or feedbacking. So when feedbacking occurred, of course, we somewhat assess our strengths and weaknesses. Let's say, for example, the teachers asked or assigned you to have or perform about a role play when it comes to the Filipinos suffered in the Spanish period, and some of the group perform well and some of the group somewhat have the lack of your performance or lack of improvements. So what is the strength there? Okay, the strength is the students performed well. In what aspect? Maybe the voice of the students is very clear, it was emphasized content wise, very good. And when I say weaknesses, there's a lacking there. Maybe some of the actors is shy, doesn't have the emotions properly executed. So this is a time the teachers, after the performance, the teacher will evaluate, will give his or her feedback. Oh, your performance is good, so it will maintain it. Or your performance is not that good, so you need to improve it. That's formative assessment. So next, so any questions? If you have questions again, just feel free to message me online. And next is, so we can compare also formative assessment to a summative assessment, because this two is somewhat related or somewhat both assessment, but it will executed in a different way. So when I say summative assessment, this will be conducted after formative assessment or after a long process of discussions or a long process of learning. Well, whereas when you say formative assessment is somewhat after the discussion and feedbacking, and this is the formative assessment because there's, a part of giving comments and suggestions. So, uh, for summative assessment occur at the end of the learning period, like I said a while ago. And formative assessments are continuous and aim to enhance the learning experience by facilitating immediate feedback and improvement. Exactly. So when we say formative assessment, we can experience those kinds of emotions. We can experience that nervousness. Why you experience nervousness? Because we don't know what will happen. We don't know the real situations, the real scenarios, or the real topic. We don't know what could be the sign, or we don't know can you a particular topic. So when we say summative test, we know already what will happen next. So to expound my explanation or my topic, so summative, or let's say for example a quiz. Yes, you guys conducted a quiz, and after that you receive your scores, and during that quiz, of course, you don't know what will the teachers uh, give questions, or what could be the questions be. Well, in a summative assessment, you know it already, right? So in a formative assessment, as a student, you will feel nervousness at first, because you will ask yourself what could be the test, or the structure, or how will be the test structured, the type of test, the level of difficulty. When you say summative test, it's a different story, because you know it already. So there's a differences there. I hope I made it clear for you guys. And next is, so before we proceed, I hope you understand, or just simply emphasizing that formative assessment and summative assessment is widely different, mainly because of its how it's structured, or how it performed during or after the discussion. Then there's examples of formative assessment. First example is the quizzes. This is one of the common, because once So first is quizzes. We all know it already. Like I said a while ago, give an example about the quizzes. So when you say quizzes, the teachers will give some quiz if the students really understand the lesson, and after that, if the teachers know the scores, oh, you missed something because you receive a low mark or low scores, and that the student receive a higher score, that means something, the student understand the lesson. So next is the classroom discussion. This is one of the common also, since the students will be somewhat discussing something in front of the class, and the teacher will give a feedback right after. Next is concept mapping, peer feedback. I will just give some what short phrases in every examples, huh? Since then concept mapping, of course, is somewhat a map that you will give a concepts in every topic that the teachers gave to you, or is somewhat, yes. Next is peer feedback, journal reflection. So I said before I will proceed, peer feedback is somewhat a group will give somewhat a feedback in every situation or every performances you have. Next, journal reflection. It is reflections on any kind of stories or a topic or aspect in 1 minute paper, think, prank, share, interactive pools, yes, observations. And observations, we all know that it's a long process. And homework review. So this is very important, as we all know, that giving a sample assessment, so that you will never be confused that what is a formative assessment. I will just going to focus about quiz. It's just like a test. No, there's more than that. It's because this is a strategy that we need, or the students we need to learn. Next is the disadvantages of formative assessment. So it's ironic to think that assessment is good for the students and it assess our learnings, it assess everything, but still there's a disadvantages. So not an is disadvantages in a way that it will harm the students, both students and teachers, but a disadvantages on the part that the time or in the part of the making of a formative assessment. We see the process. So yes, so first is subjectivity, time consuming, pressure on teachers, limited standardization, and potential for bias. So first is subjectivity. So formative assessments can be subjective and relying on the judgments of the teachers, which may lead to inconsistencies and evaluations. So from the word itself, very subjective or subjective. So this is we can deny that having such a formative assessment is very subjective. Let's say for example a role play, right? After the teachers will give feedback and it's always be subjective. Again, example, a role play. Seeing the teacher saw your performances and just said, "I love your performance. It was well executed. I don't like your performance. It's lacking stance, unclear, inorganized, lack of content." So that's the comment, and it's somewhat lead to biases because if you know the performer, it will reach to a point that you will give him somewhat, a mark that somewhat deserves with your connection with him or her. So somewhat a bias. So again, it is always be subjective, giving comments or suggestions for the students to learn or improve. And next is time consuming. In what way the formative assessment is time consuming? I know some of you might think that why time consuming? Quizzes is not time consuming. But other assessment is obviously time consuming. The time that we are going to prepare our class discussion, we have or going to conduct our observation. Obviously, it's a time consuming. But amidst all that, still we shouldn't somewhat neglect the fact that formative assessment can teach us a lot of lessons to prepare us for final examinations or during the summative test. We really learn something. Next is pressure on the teachers. Why again that there's a pressure on the teachers? Some of you might ask that. Why? Are we going to consider the pressure on the teachers where students are important here? Are we going to consider the pressure of the teachers even though they are professionals? Dear guys, even though they're professionals, they can still feel pressure, especially if we are talking about formative assessment. So pressure is may create pressure in a way that it evaluate and provide feedback affecting their workload and stress levels. So the teachers doesn't just I will give you a feedback now. Oh, your performance is good, so I will give you. No, we need to assess. We need to observe so that you can give a right feedback the students deserve. Evaluate everything. And it of course it will affect the workload and the stress levels of the teachers. And next is the limited standardization. So teachers it may lack standardization, making it challenging to compare students' progress across different classrooms or schools. So when I say limited standardization, it involves the limited or the limitations. No, there's somewhat a lack of boundaries, the lack of organization. So if you're having to conduct a formative assessment, you should always make sure that everything is organized and everything is according to the standards, so that there will be you will somewhat spot or easily assess what the students' improvements from the time you conducted the lesson or discussion after the discussion itself or after the discussion, so that you can assess. Because if there's no standard on your in your assessment, how will you know if the students really understand or improve the next time around that you will discuss or you will be having a test or examination, right? So limited standardization is also a part of it. Next is potential for bias. I already said it. during the first disadvantages in the subjectivity, yes, again, it will always lead to potential for bias. Why? Because it may unintentionally influence formative assessment results, impacting the fairness and accuracy of the evaluation. So like I said a while ago, let's say for example a role play again, the teachers give some comments of the one of both group, and she just have that connections on the first group. Say for example, it's her or his cousin, so it will somewhat affect, and it will somewhat destroy the capability or somewhat the credibility of your assessment, because there's no fairness at all. How can you have that assessment, or how can you say that the students will improve if you keep on do or giving that kind of scores which somewhat widely different from his or her performances? So as a future educator, you need to realize, or you need to remember that there's always fairness, avoid biases, because at the end of the day, the students will suffer. So if the students perform not so good, then say your performance is your performance is good, but you'd always remember that blocking stunts in a role play is somewhat a big no-no. So you need to improve it. There's a positive and there's a negative. At least it will ease the nervousness and somewhat the confidence, or somewhat stay put the confidence of the students. So always remember that we should avoid biases. And number six is emphasis on testing. So what this means? So over reliance on formative assessment may shift the focus from holistic learning to test preparation, potentially limiting a student's overall understanding of a subject. So it's always somewhat, it's too much emphasis of the task. It will somewhat destroy the learning process, because it will limit the students overall understanding of a subject. So as a teacher someday, or as a teacher, you need to think critically, not just to emphasize too much, but to use an assessment that doesn't just emphasize on the specific students capabilities, but others as well. Next is the student anxiety. So frequent assessment may contribute to students' anxiety, hindering their ability to perform as their best and impacting their overall learning experience. So mental health involves. If the student is nervous, if the students feel anxiety, what will happen? Hinder their ability to perform. So as a future educator or as a teacher, what will you do? Of course, you need to empathize. You need to ease that anxiety of him or her. So this is advantages of the formative assessment. So when you say, like I said a while ago, diba? When you say formative assessment, it's somewhat the thrill, the challenge, because you don't know what could happen during the performances or the presentations, because the teacher will give feedback, and student anxiety could happen during the presentation or during the feedbacking of the teacher. You need to mind that anxiety is everywhere. So it's somewhat, it's on the teacher and the students, how will they handle themselves when it comes to this. Next is resource intensive. So effective formative assessment may require additional resources such as technology or specialized materials which may not be readily available in all educational settings. So resource intensive. So if we are having a formative assessment but lack of resources, then it will be a difficult idea to have a successful learning process. So say for example, you conducted, a classroom observation that needs a long time, but you don't have a proper room. So how can you handle that? So it's need to consider, the resource intensive or the environment of the students, so that the students will really understand the lesson. Next is lack of accountability. So in some cases, informative or formative assessment might not be linked to accountability measures, potentially reducing the motivation for both students and teachers. So formative assessment is somewhat lack of accountability. So the time that the students give or her or his comments, the students perform well or after, the accountability will lose. Why? Why, man? It is because, like I said, formative assessment, it will assess your presentation. It will assess your performance. But right after that assessment, learning will follow. But again, it will never be accountable on that part. Next is limited coverage. So, due to their ongoing nature, formative assessment may not cover the entire breadth of a curriculum, possibly missing certain essential concepts or skills. So when we say formative assessment, it will not cover the entirety of the test or the lesson. So we need to think, we need to expand our horizon. We need to think critically on how to have that formative assessment, but it's all around learning. So question. So if you have some questions, you can just message me on my again if FB account Vincent Ray B Tambes, so that you will have that you will understand more, and you have clarifications questions. Yes, you can ask me. So don't hesitate to message me. Again, it's just a short recap. Formative assessment is very important as it assesses our strengths and weaknesses, and this formative assessment is somewhat a strategy for the teachers to give a feedback of the students' performances so that it will lead to a successful learning process. And there's also the comparison between the summative and formative assessment, which is widely different. And lastly is the this disadvantages of formative assessment. So we need to remember those disadvantages, not just to be aware, but also to learn something, that formative assessment doesn't just focus on its goodness, but there's a downside as well. So this is Vincent Ray Bitambes. Thank you.